We want to make sure that Americans can continue receiving their health care. They're already suffering. Healthcare is already costly enough as it is, and we should be moving beyond this system. We should be moving beyond to a much more equitable system, one that exists in virtually every other country. Much poorer nations than ours have been able to build and design a socialized healthcare system. We can do it here as well.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a Democrat in New York. She's executive board member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and she joins me now. Congresswoman, it does look like we are headed towards a shutdown. What do you see as the Democratic strategy and message here for a government funding bill?
I mean, Chris, we're here to help people. We are here in the midst of this destruction of the federal government, the federal safety net, $1 trillion eviscerated from people's health care, their Medicare, their Medicaid in this country, with prices that are skyrocketing and life becoming completely untenable for the American people. We are here to try to be a backstop and to be that backstop, which is what the American people have elected us to do.
So right now there's this sort of back and forth about the...
Bro. I know people go AOC or whatever the fuck, but like, can you imagine this being the main spokesperson for the Democratic Party as opposed to Chuck Schumer, and then far more radical figures like AOC being the Chuck Schumer of the Democratic Party, and then the AOCs of the Democratic Party being far more radical, being closer to Zohran Mamdani, closer to Rashida Tlaib, or even beyond that. Like, imagine a world like that. Because that would be the competent Democratic Party. Okay? That would be the competent Democratic Party. That would be a real, true left flank party. Look at the way she's talking around this. Like, stop teasing me. I will never stop teasing you.
Tax credits. And there's kind of a strange dynamic that I want to get your sense of, right? Because at one level, negotiating over the ACA tax credits is important. I mean, there are people who are going to see their premiums go up 15, 20%. Like, huge amounts are going to spike. Republicans don't like these extenders. Democrats do. They think it's good for people. But that's fully in the lane of, like, normal politics. And then at the same time, like, the president of the United States assembled 800 military commanders to say, I want you're going to have to go to war against your fellow citizens in American cities. And I think people are having a little bit of a hard time of, like, we're going to have a fight on the shutdown about the tax credits, but not about the president wants to declare war on Americans, even though I understand those two are conceptually distinct. Do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying, Chris, but, you know, I think that's something.
I mean, there's so much that the Democrats could wage war against the Republicans over. That's not a bad idea as well. That's not a bad idea to highlight as well. Like, there's so much. Doge cuts. Tax cuts for the wealthy, and then trying to not add to the deficit as much by basically cutting $800 billion in healthcare, something that they're fighting for. Mass kidnappings taking place in every American city. ICE now having more power than they ever have had at any point since its inception in 2001 or 2003. No, 2001, right? What year did the Department of Homeland Security get invented? It was right after 9/11, right? 2002? People forget. They think ICE has been around.
To really set the record straight here on, this is not a fight over tax credits. This is a fight over your ability to go to a pharmacy.
What? Why is the left letting this happening? This is incredibly frustrating. Why is the left not pushing back? What are you talking about? We're literally watching a prominent Democrat push back. Do you mean like what? They are doing that. This is it. Why do you think the government shut down, chatter? That's the reason. We're washing it.
Afford your insulin. We're not talking about just 15 or 20% increases in people's premiums. Tomorrow, healthcare companies, and today, healthcare companies are finalizing the premiums that everyday Americans are going to be paying. And we are talking about a doubling of monthly healthcare premiums, not even including your deductible, in terms of what people are going to be paying next year because of $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts that were put together earlier this year. And I don't know about anybody else, but I do not think that this is just about a tax break or a small tax extender. This is about fighting not just on tax breaks, community health centers, and ensuring that we have a stability of the American healthcare system.
Yeah, it's about protecting rural hospitals. Like, rural hospitals overwhelmingly rely on Medicaid for funding. Nursing homes as well overwhelmingly rely on Medicaid for funding because Medicare coverage lapses beyond nursing homes. For like long-term care, nursing home care, you need Medicaid as well. And it's crazy to me that that's the base of support for MAGA. This is, unironically, the Democrats fighting against the MAGA party at the behest of the MAGA base. What are we doing? That's what's so crazy about it. I don't know anyone who acts like you. What? Cares about the future of this fucking country? No matter how much it seems like everyday citizens don't. No matter how much everyday citizens act out against people like myself for caring about the fucking future of this country, regardless of how hostile the average American is to my position. Okay, this is the last one. This is the Lokum Turkish Delight. Bro, everything that I had was bomb. Except for the hummus. The hummus was ass. And the arayas or the za'atar wasn't great either. But everything else was bomb. With chicken and rice, I already downed it.
And when Republicans use a legislative mechanism to gut the American healthcare system, we have to use a legislative mechanism in order to restore it and to fight for it. Because at the end of the day, you know, people may talk about tax credits this and tax credits that. What they do understand is when you have insulin and you can't afford it. What they do understand is when your kid has chemotherapy or your spouse gets diagnosed with cancer and you go into a hospital and it doesn't get covered. And you have to choose life and death, what this is about. Now, that does not mean that we ignore the abhorrent violation of law and norms and what is happening with our U.S. cities, but we have a broad spectrum of ways and places that we can fight, including our governors, our attorney generals, and our state and municipal leaders, as you just saw.
So I just want to make sure I understand this just from your perspective here. So, and I think this is generally the view of congressional leadership as well. You can correct me if I'm wrong. If there was bipartisan compromise, right? If everyone came together, the leaders of the parties, the president, and said, yes, these 5 things, we're going to make sure that these premium supports keep going. We're going to fund community health centers, whatever the sort of asks on appropriation around people's affordable health care. If those were met, Democrats would be a yes. Like, that is the box that this is happening in, as opposed to we can't fund a Department of Justice that prosecutes political enemies or whatever else might be out there.
Well, let me tell you, Chris, the mechanism by which that deal is locked is not just about agreeing in concept on tax credits. We need to do it with no tricks, no games, and no backdoors, which includes rescissions. And when we talk about rescissions, that is the mechanism that the federal government is using to gut and destroy rule of law across the board. So we are fighting to ensure that healthcare is protected.
Like I said, saying the MAGA base is going to be the ones most impacted by defunding healthcare is a bit disingenuous. No, a lot of the wealthy individuals in this country are MAGA because they voted for their capital. Saying this as the son of a retired self-made multimillionaire that is also the son of an immigrant, fuck irony. No, because while there are more wealthy people that vote for the Republican Party as opposed to the Democratic Party, there are still a fuck ton more poor people in this country than there are wealthy people in this country. And that means that the overwhelming majority of the base of support for both parties is always going to be poor people. And if you're living in a red state, you already have a lot of services that have been crippled by austerity. So you're already in a shittier position overall. If you live in a red state, if you live in a rural area, for example, especially important, rural areas already have a crisis with keeping their hospitals open. If you live in a rural area, you are far more likely to vote Republican, okay? The real divide in this country oftentimes is not about like blue states versus red states. It's about rural areas versus urban environments, okay? If you live in an urban area, you're more than likely to vote Democrat. If you live in a rural area, regardless of whichever state you're in, you're probably voting Republican. And ironically enough, throw the 1% aside. They vote, they vote for either party. They majority vote for the Republicans. Who cares? But when you look at the actual base of support for the Republican Party, that comes from rural areas. And those people are the ones that are getting fucked over the most. Those people are the ones who are going to get harmed even further by this because they already don't have enough hospitals in rural areas and they're slated for closure. And those hospitals already rely on Medicaid to fund itself, okay? So when they no longer have Medicaid, when rural Medicaid recipients no longer have that Medicaid, they can't go to the hospital and pay for their health care. Then that hospital has to fucking go bankrupt and close. So this quite literally hurts Republicans in rural areas more than anybody else. And that is the fucking base of support that is at the heart of the Republican Party's power. It's ignorance that makes people vote against their best interests. It's a lack of faith in the opposition party. So I do still blame the Democrats for that make people vote against their best interests. It's racism that makes people vote against their best interests. There are a million different reasons. But right now, the Democrats, as it stands, are the only game in town that is actively trying to defend the MAGA base of support from the MAGA party. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what people's opinions are. It doesn't matter what people's politics are. That is the reality. The Republican Party has taken the initiative to hurt its own base. The Democrats are willing to throw bows and force a government to a shutdown in order to protect the MAGA Republicans living in rural areas right now. That is exactly what's going on. And it's obviously not just MAGA Republicans, it's obviously Democrats as well. It's just like the working class Americans. But make no mistake, there is a sad irony to the situation.
For every American. But the way that we do that also means that the only way that you guarantee that is by forcing them to adhere to the rule of law, which means eliminating the rescission loopholes that they put in the CR earlier this year, which the Senate unfortunately had caved on then, and we're ensuring that doesn't happen now.
Yeah, the quick 10-second version for people that haven't followed this is that, you need 60 votes to get the filibuster to appropriate funds for the government, but they can pass a rescission, which is to claw back some of the money already agreed to by 50 votes. So they have this kind of like cake and eat it too model where it's like, oh yeah, we'll come together, we'll pass a bipartisan appropriations bill, and then when we've done that, then we'll go and get rid of the stuff we don't like, which just seems like an insane way to negotiate.
It's no way to negotiate. And again, we don't even have to get into the technicalities of this. But what is important to understand is that the way that you honor an agreement and the way that we honor our fight for health care and to define and to also protect everyday Americans' ability to afford their health care, to cover their kids, to defend Medicaid. Those are the same mechanisms that we use to defend our rule of law, to defend the federal workers that we are trying to protect in this shutdown. Donald Trump is trying to play this bluffing game of, well, maybe what we're going to do is hold all the federal workforce hostage and fire everybody. Donald Trump has been fired.
Something important to consider is that taking away 20% of ACA tax credits from someone can take 10x that person's insurance spending. Some people's subsidies cover enough that they pay $20 a month, but they would end up paying over $200 with reduced subsidy. That person isn't getting chemo because they died not knowing that they had cancer because they don't go to the doctor. It's just pure evil, man. I think paywalling healthcare is one of the most evil things that this administration has actively defended. And it's incredible to me that so many more Americans are not always mad about this shit.
Firing everybody. We saw this with DOJ. We've seen this at the State Department. We've seen this at the Department of Justice. They are firing everybody. They are completely eliminating the federal workforce. And in order for us to stop this madness, we have to put a stop to it, and we have to stop enabling their abuse of power, including their use of rescissions. And when we're fighting on their health care, it forces them to act in ways in accordance with the law in other ways, too.
Let me ask you this. There are some people I have seen who have the following theory of why Senate Democrats have not cut a deal where they give 8 votes and move along. And that is that Chuck Schumer is worried about a primary challenge from you and is worried about the politics to his left flank. And so because of that worry about a primary challenge, he's going to shut down the government. Ergo, it is AOC's fault that the government's shutting down, or that you're somehow the kind of fulcrum of this. And I want to just ask you straight up, are you planning to primary challenge him? Do you think that's why he's doing this?
This is...
By the way, that is true. I hate to admit that the Republicans are right on that a little bit. There is no world in which Chuck Schumer would actually fucking do the right thing ever unless he was reasonably worried about maintaining his office. Okay? Everybody hates him, and I'm sure a part of that pressure does come from a much better alternative that will primary him into fucking oblivion. Okay? That's it. I mean, that's one part of it. That's one part of the pressure that's causing Chuck Schumer to finally fucking do any job, really. Do a job. Let's be real. I cannot believe that it took 9 months of people demanding he retire and an active primary threat from a much more nationally popular politician for Chuck Schumer to finally do the right thing for once. And before you say Chris Hayes is a dick for asking this question, I don't think so. I think it's a good question for AOC to answer, and I think her answer was pretty good. Her answer could have been more aggressive towards Chuck Schumer to be like, yeah, there is some truth to that. It's not me. I'm simply a way for people to voice their frustrations with the leadership of the party. You see the polls. 62% of Democrats want Hakeem Jeffries to be replaced as well. Obviously, we have a crisis of good leadership in the party. It's not a secret that I was undermined when I was running for head of oversight. Very obvious that this party needs fresh, new talent. There is a lot of demand. There's a lot of appetite for more radical and bold policy fighters. Okay, and the old guard has shown time and time again that they cannot meet the moment. You know, if you were running for Chuck Schumer's seat, that's something you would say. And then you would turn around and say, however, now is not the time for primary conversations. And Chuck Schumer has my full confidence in this moment as long as he continues to stand strong against the Trump administration. Because obviously, that is what matters most. We want to make sure that Americans can continue receiving their health care. They're already suffering. Healthcare is already costly enough as it is. And we should be moving beyond this system. We should be moving beyond to a much more equitable system, one that exists in virtually every other country. Much poorer nations than ours have been able to build and design a socialized healthcare system. We can do it here as well. But in the interim, right now, Chuck Schumer and myself and every other Democrat that stands strong are there for the American population. We are doing this because we want the Republicans to give us assurances to save healthcare.
So not about me in this moment. This is about people being able to insure their children. And I will say, because I saw some senators speculating about this, and I saw some Republican members of Congress saying, oh, well, if we have this shutdown, it's because of AOC. Well, if that's the case, my office is open, and you are free to walk in and negotiate with me directly. Because what I'm not going to do is tolerate.
Okay, Chris. Inappropriate. You're just snorting into the microphone. God damn. Is this how you guys feel when I speak with my mouth full? You can't even say, oh, Sean Hannity doesn't burp into the mic anymore. At least with Chris Hayes, you can hear him sniffling into the microphone. Okay?
4 million uninsured Americans because Donald Trump decided one day that he wants to just make sure that kids are dying because they don't have access to insurance. That's what's not going to happen. And so if those senators think that we're having a shutdown because of me, they're free to enter my office and negotiate, because what we're not going to do is allow all of millions of people in this country to not be able to afford their insulin and their chemotherapy. So come strike a deal with me if that's what they really think is going on.
I know he was laughing.
There is, over the last week, it seems a lot of people, and I include myself among them, feel like a sort of rising sense of alarm about the aggressiveness of the sort of authoritarian aspirations of this government, essentially firing a U.S. attorney to replace him with a patsy who will indict a political enemy. The continued threat of using the military on American citizens, the ordering the troops to Portland and then backing up because it was 5-year-old B-roll. I don't know. Do you feel the same way over this last week or two? Does it feel like continuity to you? Are there conversations in your caucus about what this last week has meant?
I think there's two things that are happening at once, and this is something that's very important for people to understand. One, there absolutely is an unprecedented abuse of power, destruction of norms, erosion of our government and our democracy in order to prop up an authoritarian style of governance. That is happening. However, they are weaker than they look. And it is important that we remember that, because what they rely on is the impression of power, the perception of inevitability, in us giving up in advance to say, oh, what's going to happen if I stand up, et cetera. Nothing's going to happen. They rely on that perception of inevitability and power so that people comply in advance and acquiesce in advance and give up in advance. And at the end of the day, Donald Trump is at record levels of unpopularity in his tenure. The Republican House is at record levels of unpopularity. They are underwater across the board, and they know it.
She stole your whole flow, dog? Dog, why do you think I fucking speak? Why do you think I say these things? I say these things so you repeat them. I hope that politicians will repeat them as well. The fuck do you mean? It's free ball, baby. It's free money. I know. I don't think she got this from myself. I'm sure she also arrived at the same conclusions on her own.
And that is causing them to double down in public, but it is backfiring. That is why, whether it's a shutdown, whether it's all of this, they want us to blink first. And we have too much to save. Protecting people is too important a task for us to give up before anything even starts. So they may want to send people in, but these National Guardsmen do not want to be turned against their fellow Americans. We're seeing this here in Washington, D.C. It is an insult. Donald Trump is insulting the service members of this country by putting them on these silly tasks that they themselves do not want to be enforcing. And so we have to understand that standing up matters, that our voice matters, to not give in to this cynicism, because that is what they rely on in order to perpetuate this idea that they are that they have total immunity from consequence. They will experience the consequences of this, but we have to be the consequence, which is why we have to stand tall right now alongside everyday Americans who want us to be standing up right now as well.
I want final question for you is about a ruling that came from.
Oh, yeah. FBI director cut ties with the ADL. I know. I'm going to get to it in a second.
A federal district judge.
By the way, that was a great speech. Obviously, it'd be rather silly of me to say that that's a bad speech, considering it's one that I have delivered as well in the past. But it's great.
Who's been on the bench for decades and who was appointed by Ronald Reagan. It's in the case of Ramesa Oztark and a few other individuals whose alleged that their free speech, First Amendment rights as protected by the Constitution, were violated by ICE grabbing them because of things they said or wrote. And one of the things he gets to is the masking of ICE agents, which is something that we've seen in New York City, here in Chicago and around. He says, this court has listened carefully to the reason given by Oztark's captors for masking up. It rejects this testimony as disingenuous, squalid, and dishonorable. Mm-hmm. ICE goes mass for a single reason, to terrorize Americans into quiescence. It's a federal judge appointed by Reagan. In all our history, we've never tolerated an armed mass secret police. Carrying on in this fashion, ICE brings indelible obloquy to this administration and everyone who works.
Bro, I can't believe I'm saying this, but how the fuck does a Reagan-era federal judge have a better grip on the situation than literally like 85% of the Democratic Party? Like, there are a handful of Democrats that have so eloquently presented what Donald Trump is doing in his attacks against the First Amendment with immigrant apprehensions as a mechanism of immigration enforcement. Actually, I'd go so far as to say that there's like 3 maximum. I wouldn't even say AOC has actually gone this aggressively on this issue. It's like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, and that's kind of it. This is another thing that I have been screaming about from the rooftops over and over again. And I'm so glad that it took a motherfucking Reagan judge to correctly point this out. Using normal people words to get normal people votes? Wait, what? Use normal people? Man, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm not saying you should deploy the term indelible obliquity or however the fuck you say it. Are you stupid? I say it all the time. The Trump administration is cynically framing the conversation against Israel as one that is actually about anti-Semitism and combating anti-Semitism, and they're doing it from the mechanism of immigration enforcement. They're deporting people for talking shit about Israel. That is unconstitutional. That's unconstitutional. The Constitution protects migrants, both documented and undocumented alike, on U.S. soil. Okay? A lot of people misunderstand what the Constitution is supposed to do. A better way to frame this is as a restriction on the government. Okay? That's what the Constitution is doing. The Constitution is not there to restrict American citizens. It is there to restrict the government from regulating American citizens on certain issues. It protects every single person on U.S. soil unconditionally, okay? Citizens and non-citizens alike. Documented citizens, documented non-citizens, and undocumented non-citizens alike. There's no confusion on this. And yet, for some weird reason, Democrats haven't been saying this. Okay? The whole point of the fucking Constitution is to regulate the government, is to restrict the government. And the Trump administration, as I correctly pointed to early on, even before he actually became president, was going to open up the door to eroding First Amendment protections by starting off with migrants that they thought were more vulnerable because people wouldn't defend them, okay? And also attack the issue starting with anti-Semitism, which has a lot of institutional persuasive power because there are a lot of advocacy groups on the right and also on the left, on the liberal side especially, that have been tasked with, quote unquote, combating anti-Semitism, which is, simply to stop people from saying shit about Israel. Okay? Yes, on the liberal side as well. Even on the leftist side. There's a reason why there are so many fucking progressive, except for Palestine leftists out there who claim to be leftists, but then, only until recently didn't realize that Israel was a fucking ethno-state doing an apartheid and a genocide. There's a reason, and that is because of the institutional capture of the Zionist lobby and Zionist advocacy groups. That's it. And the Trump administration was very well aware of this, and they realized that that would be the easiest way to open up the door to eroding the First Amendment. This is all laid out, as I have told you time and time again, in Project Esther, which is the First Amendment attack that the Heritage Foundation designed, starting with anti-Semitism, starting with tackling anti-Semitism, which is like anti-Israel sentiment, of course, and then using immigration enforcement, where there's unilateral power in the hands of the fucking state, only to then move on to anti-Christian behavior, for example, or anti-capitalism, as the Trump administration is now designing under new designations as violent rhetoric. Okay? Anti-American, anti-capitalist, anti-Christian rhetoric is now considered violent rhetoric. Where the fuck do you think that goes?
Is it at all bracing to read a Reagan-appointed federal district judge write something like that in finding that Ramesa Ozturk's and others' rights were violated?
Of course. I mean, once, as you said, for a Reagan-appointed judge to be out and out talking about secret police in the United States of America in the year 2025 tells us everything about what's going on. And we get to these extremes through these small erasures and steps when everyone says makes an exception here or makes an exception there. And then before you know it, you have masked agents roaming the streets of this country that do not feel entitled to identify themselves or do not feel like as though they answer to the American people at all. That is dangerous. And it is not without saying, it does not go without saying that the people that they went after first are some of the most vulnerable activists in the United States, which is to say pro-Palestinian organizers and young people, especially those who are on green cards or on visas. Yeah. And the idea that we would allow our freedom of speech to be violated and create exceptions to that for people who are advocating for the lives of Palestinians it erodes at the very core of American identity, too, because this is a land of the free, but only as long as we defend it and make it so. And so we have a responsibility to ensure that that these individuals are protected, including Mahmoud Khalil, who the Trump administration is currently trying to move to deport.
Yes, in fact, trying very, very hard as we speak. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you very much.